On Friday's show, we tried to strike a hopeful, positive, dare I say even optimistic feeling going into the weekend. You know who you haven't seen or heard from in a while? Donald Trump. Those were the days, right? Trump hadn't taken the bait or commented on a whole slew of issues by Friday night. So we were hopeful that he might go dark for a while and be sort of MAGA without the crazy. We were wrong on social media Saturday. A massive fraud of this type, referring to the Twitter censoring of the Hunter Biden laptop and magnitude, allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. He was complaining about the Twitter file showing internal deliberations over suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story. We just wanted you to know that we were wrong. Trump didn't go dark. Chalk that one up to wishful thinking. We, of course, take pride in telling you when we are wrong. I'm pretty sure none of the cable news anchors who pushed the Russian collusion story or the Steele dossier or the hands up, don't shoot narrative or the Jussie Smollett hoax have ever apologized to you. But we will point out when we are wrong, and we'll apologize. Back to Trump, who never apologizes despite Mike Pence's demand of it. Of course, the Sunday shows made every Republican disavow Trump over the comments, blah, blah, blah. But more importantly, nobody really cared what he said. I don't mean nobody in the media, but normal people didn't really seem to care, much like an old singer who just can't hit the right notes anymore. Dr. Lauren Wright is here, professor at Princeton University. Good to see you, as always. Is there something to the world has moved on from so much of Donald Trump's social media, even if the media has not?
I don't know. And I think we're not close enough to the 2024 Republican primary to tell yet. I think maybe people aren't paying super close attention. There's a huge election in Georgia tomorrow. There's a lot of other issues that you've been covering at the top of the hour that are catching people's attention. And so he has to compete with not only a lot of other stories in American politics, but huge national headlines. And this signals to me possibly maybe a desperation where the things he's saying are so extreme and they're getting more extreme and it's not having the splash perhaps, but it's too early to tell, Leland.
I remember when calling Mexicans rapists was way too extreme and shocking to the world. And those seemed like the quaint old days.
Well, it was.
Yeah, no, it was. But now those seem like the quaint old days. You think about all that Trump hadn't addressed as of Friday, and we went through this. He hadn't responded to Mike Pence, hadn't responded to Ron DeSantis, hadn't really talked about Ye, the special masters, tax returns case, House GOP battle, the Georgia Senate runoff you talked about, the railroad strike, China, Biden's flip-flop on Ukraine. He hadn't talked about any of that stuff. And now all of a sudden he picks this issue that, yes, to a certain part of the American populace of Twitter censoring of the Hunter Biden laptop story is emblematic of something bigger. But in and of itself, is that what resonates with voters these days?
It's not. And that's one of the lessons perhaps we'll take away from the midterms is that people are sick of hearing Trump's 2020 election lies. They're sort of sick of hearing him frame these huge national political debates in terms of himself. But that's what he does. He just can't let it go. And we don't have any evidence, by the way, that had that story not been suppressed, the election results would have been differently. I think there's plenty more evidence based on research on 2016 that of the people that would have seen that, maybe they would have voted for Trump anyway. And so he's making a huge leap, and it's more about himself. Well,
right. Rule number one, though, it's always about Trump when it comes to what Trump says. That said, the flip side of the Twitter story, there's a certain media to whom it is everything, and there's others to whom it is nothing. We'll put it somewhere in the middle. It's clear that Twitter gave preferential treatment to Democrats in Democratic ideas, namely because, as we could see, the campaign contributions of employees and their political proclivities were far to the left. Does this sort of shift to the center, or even if you want to argue the right of Twitter under Elon Musk, do we have long enough going from now until 2024 for that to actually make a difference?
I don't know. They really have to hash this out.
Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.